All right, Sandra, let's bring in Nikki Haley, the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and former governor of South Carolina, also host of the Nikki Haley Live podcast on SiriusXM. Great to see you. It's been a while.
Great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you for coming in. So Biden is urging a proportional response from Israel. Listen to what he said under the wing of Air Force One the other day.
Do you support an attack on Iran's nuclear sites by Israel?
The answer is no. I think there's things. We'll be discussing with the Israelis what they're going to do, but all seven of us agree that they have a right to respond, but they should respond in proportion.
So there's some talk about what will Israel do, that they could maybe go after an oil production facility. But other people are saying, look, as long as they just kind of punch Iran in the nose, it's going to continue its malign activities until it goes in there and really breaks a bunch of things. Israel's going to face the threat.
I mean, first of all, let's take a look. You've got a U.S. president who got together with the G7 to decide what Israel should do. And in no world would I have ever expected that he would take the side of the Ayatollah, that he would take the side of the Ayatollah, telling Israel, don't do it, hold back, and calling for restraint. Why would you do that when the Iranians and the IRGC are saying death to America, too? It defies all logic. Biden has been an Iranian sympathizer from the very beginning. The Obama administration was like this, too. The question is, what is Harris going to do? We have to ask her. This is a war happening in the Middle East. So when they talk about escalation, this is already a war. How is she going to handle it? Does she agree with Biden that they need to hold Israel back? You can say Israel has the right to defend themselves, but you don't get to say but. Israel has the right to defend themselves, but the but is what's so wrong. And I feel bad that Israel is hearing from Biden say, we've got to talk to Israel. We've got to tell them what we think they should do. They need to hold back. He has yet to put the sanctions back on the oil for Iran. Iran's getting all of their money from oil because Biden won't put the sanctions back on it.
It would be interesting to see what Kamala Harris's position on this is.
She has to answer this.
Well, it would be nice if she would hold a news conference so that we could ask her those questions, but she is not. So Iran has for decades been upsetting the apple cart of the Middle East. Iran was attacking Israel through its proxies, but now Iran's attacking Israel directly. And I know that Israel doesn't want this war. Most of the people in Lebanon don't want a war. Egypt doesn't want a war. Jordan doesn't want a war. Saudi Arabia doesn't want a war. Bahrain doesn't want a war. The United Arab Emirates, they don't want a war either. And yet Biden continues what appears to be a policy of appeasement toward Iran. Why doesn't he just, with the support of most of the Arab world, just say, shut this stuff down now?
He doesn't want to do it, but Israel's going to shut it down on their own. Think about it. Israel is taking on Hamas in Gaza. They're now taking on Hezbollah in Lebanon, who's been striking since October 8th, 60,000 people displaced. Now they're taking on the Houthis in Yemen. This tiny little country is fighting all of America's enemies. And yet the American president is taking the side of the mob boss, the Ayatollah, who's leading the charge. It defies all logic. If we care about safety in America, if we care about holding the terrorists back that want to kill Americans, we have to be on the side of Israel. And it says a lot when the American president's not on the side of Israel. And we have to ask who the next Democrat nominee is going to be, what her role is going to be. If she's okay with what Biden's doing, we're in trouble.
I want to ask you about your support for former President Trump, because you, Robert O'Brien, and some 298 other national security officials wrote a letter coming out in support of Donald Trump and his foreign policy. Politico says that your endorsement of Donald Trump doesn't necessarily mean that people who supported you during the primary campaign are going to follow you. They wrote, quote, while it's unclear how many of her Republican supporters are now backing the Democratic nominee, and it may be a tiny slice, that they are still unwilling to support their party leader Trump could have implications for the former president, considering how tight the 2024 presidential race is shaping up to be. I'm wondering, particularly when you take a look at the gender gap, let's put that up on the screen. Harris is leading Trump with women 58 to 37%. He could use the help of your supporters. What can you do to try to help him and narrow that gap?
Well, I think that, the Harris campaign's doing a good job of trying to claim he's losing them. I think of 150 chairs that we had, I think maybe less than 10 have gone the Harris side. But what Trump needs to do is talk to suburban women, talk to independents, make sure that they know he doesn't need to be having a primary debate at this point. He needs to be talking to the 5% of people who are going to decide that. Suburban women and independents still have the verdict out. The best thing he can do is let them feel secure on what he's going to do with the economy, what he's going to do with the border, what he's going to do in terms of wars in the Middle East, what he's going to do
It's
with...
kind of like the security moms of 2004.
I mean, I think it's one of those things where they just need assurances. And if you're talking about things over here that don't matter, if you're talking about whether Kamala's dumb, if you're talking about, you know, Haitians eating cats, you're losing them. But if you're talking about the fact that you're going to be strong with Israel, if you're talking about the fact that you're going to secure the border, if you're talking about the fact that you're going to make sure you pay down debt, that's when suburban women and independents pay attention. That's what he needs to do.
Well, I get the sense that he was just watching you on Trump Force One heading to Michigan, so we'll see if he takes the advice. Governor, great to see you. It's been a long time.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.